yet. All right, so we are back at the meeting table to continue to work on these strategies for basically an ROI for some of the spend plans that have been presented to us, but more importantly, just as we pave our way going through the different departments and their accounts and where we would like to see education go and how our portion of the piece is how the money tied to it is used and how we can then show that we are generating educational success. We are very grateful for Chief of Staff Young and her amazing problem-solving skills that she is taking her time again to walk us through and bring this into a manageable type of an endeavor as we look forward to the legislative year, to the educational and financial year ahead, and and down the road where we want everything to all end up. So unless Deputy Superintendent Jones would like to intervene before I turn it over to Chief of Staff Young, I will turn it over to Chief of Staff Young.
Yes, ma'am. Chief of Staff Young. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So to revisit the items specific to the draft models of ROI, I'm just going to provide a quick overview of what we are hoping to get feedback on from you as board members today. And at any point, if there's questions or you have additional feedback, want to have discussion, guidance, direction, please don't hesitate to let me know. And or through the chair, we can pause for those items. So just from a historical standpoint, since I know folks are joining from a lot of other activities they've engaged in during their day. So this is staff bringing forward our draft ROI logic models for specific programs that you as the Finance Committee prioritized for us to begin this work on. One of the lenses we discussed in committee was that some of these programs may come up during legislative session. And so that is how these particular programs are here with you today, is that there's one or more aspects where we think it could be part of the conversation during legislative session. And so our goal today is kind of a three-part process. First and foremost is that we are going to go through each of the logic models on slide 1, which is the key logic model, with a specific approach and intentional opportunity for you to give feedback on the short-term outcomes and performance measure alignment. Our goal as staff is to get your input as board members on if these are the data sets that you think are helping you determine the success of the program and or the opportunities for improvement. So we'll go through each of those one by one, and again, invite feedback and conversation related to the way that staff are proposing those short-term outcomes and performance measure alignment to make sure that it meets your needs as board members. In addition to that, then we'll move to the previous conversation, which was slide 4. And slide 4 for each of these, as discussed in the September Finance Committee, was a conversation around potential legislative considerations that you as the board may take in terms of additional interest and discussion. So for that section, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify we are not asking the finance committee to take action on all of those items. And I apologize that that wasn't made clear in the September setting. We are looking for your feedback on which of these items are of interest to you so that we can bring them back to you in a future setting for your discussion and direction. So we have kind of populated a list of potential topics, and that's what you'll see in slide 4 as previously discussed. And we'll be looking for direction from you as finance committee members on which of those items you'd like to go further in depth with. Once we have that list identified, we will then open the floor up for additional direction and guidance on if there is specific information you would like to direct us as staff to bring back. So, for example, there was a conversation related to CTE add-on and a potential amendment to the existing board rule information. If the finance committee chose to identify that as a topic that they would like to bring back, one of the pieces that was discussed in September was it would really be beneficial to hear from LEA leaders on their thoughts on this. So we will be seeking any additional details or guidance on what type of information you'd be interested in so that we can bring that forward. I apologize, Board Member Boggess, I don't have any slides at this time. I'm just kind of giving an overview of our agenda.
Oh, okay. I thought you had mentioned I was to be looking at slide 4.
Oh, my apologies. That is specific to as we get into the second part of the conversation on the logic model and potentially policy considerations.
Okay.
Each of those files, the 4th slide addresses those policy considerations by program. But I'll be screen sharing during the conversation so that you have that visual as a reference as well.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarity. I appreciate it.
Of course. And so our goal today is just to be able to get that information and that feedback related to our next steps so that we as staff can come back prepared to be able to support you as a committee on future decision making as it relates to how we're measuring the outcomes of these programs, as well as how that informs the conversations you would like to engage in during the legislative session. So with that kind of overview, with the chair's direction, I will go ahead and bring up our first program, which would be the CTE add-on, unless there's any additional guidance or clarification that I can provide before we jump in.
It looks like Member Straight has a question or comment, and then Chair Moss has a question or comment. So Member Straight.
Yeah, so you mentioned the need to address legislative actions that we've put in place. I was wondering, after looking at through this list and reading the template and looking at some of the, like the CTE, I looked at that one and the kindergarten and Beverly Taylor Sorensen, and there was a whole bunch. But would it be possible that all of those cases would need to have its own?
Chair, if I could ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
So Board Member Straight, when it comes to have its own, I think for each of these, you'll see that the way we've organized each logic model is specific to a standalone funding stream. So that's why you see SOEP broken up into 3. It actually has 3 separate funding streams that are under that larger umbrella of SOEP. The opportunity for the board is to be able to make any sort of recommendations to bring items back to you as a finance committee related to additional considerations or action steps you may want to take towards any given program. Staff has provided some considerations for you, but we really are looking for your direction on what those interests are so that we can prepare for that for a future conversation. Does that help answer your question in terms of each individual program, or did I miss the mark?
I think I'm misunderstanding something.
Okay.
when you say funding streams, I think that's where I'm not understanding. So that eliminated some of the other business cases, or help me understand that part.
Yes, no, I understand where you're coming from. So the approach for ROI is that we will do these ROI efforts for every single program funding stream that we receive here at the Utah State Board of Education. So eventually, Board Member Straight, you will see this for all of your programs, regardless of legislative need. These particular programs were identified as part of a Finance Committee discussion in August because there could be some overlap with some efforts that you as the board were already considering for legislative session this upcoming period. So to your point, this is not to be representative of all of the potential legislative funding items that you as the board may be considering in your future meetings. These are just the first set of programs that were identified in Finance Committee that may have some legislative outcomes. There are certainly others that are still on that list and open for you as a board to take action on in future meeting settings for budgetary direction. Does that help?
Immensely.
Okay.
One other point though, on the kindergarten one, if the problem statement presupposes that there's inequitable access to high quality full day kindergarten. And so is that do we need to get that narrow, or because it seems like to me there's lots of questions, but when you get down to the performance measures, it talks about progress on Acadiance reading. How does that relate back to inequitable access?
A great question. And so as we go through each of the individual programs, that is feedback that we're actively looking for and would appreciate, board discussion and dialogue about. So to your point being like, I don't know if this problem statement really captures everything, or this performance measure seems limited. Can we talk about why that was selected and what maybe some of our other options are? We can do that program by program. And again, that's why we're bringing them forward as drafts. That feedback is very helpful to us because ultimately we want these to be reflective of the interests and your rationale as well related to how we're assessing the outcomes of each program. So for kindergarten, I have kindergarten a little later in my program list, but at the chair's discretion, we could move it first if you'd prefer to start there.
No, I was just trying to clarify, so when we get into the discussion, I understand what I'm looking for and I can relate it back. So thank you.
Great. Okay, Chair Moss.
Thank you, and I am so sorry. I now have an AI companion, but I can't find how to put up my hand. So I was going to ask the AI to put my hand up, and I just kind of thought, no, I'll just do this. I'm sorry. It's an evolving system. Quick point. Sorry to ramble. And I appreciate how Chief of Staff Young has developed this. And I'm sorry I wasn't there Friday. I was stuck in Stockton, as I told Chair Norton, litigating a wonderful class action case. But I'm glad we have this opportunity. And I think one of the points here, as we as a committee ask ourselves and then give input to the board on how we measure success and how we tie funding to success, we have a ready-made set of performance measures that have been chosen from as an initial indicator. And I was talking to Chief of Staff Young about this. This is an opportunity for we as board members to suggest our own, what else would we want to know that might indicate whether funding is being successful for students. And so one example I just threw out, I have no idea if it's available, smart, prudent, whatever. When we're looking at CTE, an important measure might be enrollment. Another one might be, are you getting certificates out of this? Are they advancing, right? So further down the road, I just think part of this, and that could be messy. We don't always have that data. We'd have to ask if we should get that data. Does somebody else have the data? There's a lot of questions about that. But if we're asking what success looks like, I think this is an opportunity for we as board members to weigh in. So I just wanted to add that piece that we're not necessarily limited. The performance measures are built in. We're required to report them to the legislature, and that's the easiest set of measures that already fit the system. But if there are other thoughts, I think this is the place to discuss those, at least if I'm not off track there. I see Sarah nodding her head. So I think the whole point of this exercise is for, we as board members to ask ourselves those questions. What does success look like? And that includes the selection of those outcome measures that by which we can, compare the funding inputs.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Chief of Staff Young, so you may continue.
Excellent, thank you. So the first program that we are going to address is going to be CTE add-on. So I know that this is one where, to Board Member Straight's earlier reference, you do as a board have a potential legislative funding request that is being considered related to this use case. So what I have on the screen is the ROI draft logic model for the CTE add-on proposal. And as we discussed previously, I'm going to focus in on these two boxes that are on the right side of the screen related to short-term outcomes and then performance measure alignment. So again, for the purposes of future reporting that we would bring back to you, the aspects that we're looking at for the CTE add-on funding stream is, in short term, the number of students participating in CTE programs, and a caveat that does include concurrent enrollment and non-credit articulations. And then as well, the number of certifications earned by students are being proposed for kind of short-term outcomes that we would report back on. The performance measure alignment is the percent of students in Utah participating in readiness coursework, noting that that is a more umbrella measure that also includes efforts around AP, IB, concurrent enrollment, and then concentrators in CTE pathways. So this is the outcomes that staff are recommending, and we do have CTE experts on to be able to answer any questions. But the question we would pose to you as a committee are these measures in alignment with how you would assess the outcomes and impacts of the program?
Board Member Straight?
Yeah, so I'm assuming a couple things, and maybe I can get some education here. Because I do know that it often felt like CTE was a school within school when I was a teacher. And so one of my questions is, because this is an add-on, I would assume that CTE funding does not necessarily tie into the WPU. Am I incorrect or correct on that? Or is it somewhere between?
So Chair, that would be best addressed by our Director of CTE, if you could recognize Director Longhurst.
You bet. Go ahead, Director Longhurst.
Good afternoon, Talia Longhurst. I'm the Director of Career and Technical Education at USBE. Thank you for that question. So students, while they're in CTE classes, the school continues to generate the regular WPU for those students. Add-on is intended to be in addition to the regular WPU because of the higher cost of the CTE programs.
So has there been in the past where the add-on doesn't occur, they get their WPU, but they don't get the add-on, so they might be falling behind in terms of inflation and the things that cost more for them?
Chair, if I may.
Of course, yes.
So there are some programs that would be considered under the CT umbrella that are not funded by add-on program or add-on dollars, but the vast majority of them are. The WPU value for the CT add-on is equal now, today, is equal to the value of the regular WPU as well. There are some issues in terms of growth of CTE programs and ultimately how the formulas all work in terms of flowing that add-on money out to the LEAs about how really valuable that funding is and whether or not there is value in adding money to that pot.
Is there something that, how might we phrase a question or gather information to show the connection between the add-on and WPU over time? I'm not sure I'm sure what the question even is.
I'm going to tag in for a minute and see if she has a thought. Our coordinator, CT coordinator over our CTE finances, Wendy Morton, if that's all right, Chair.
You bet. Thanks, Wendy, for joining in this conversation.
Wendy is traveling this week. She is back east for a meeting, and I know she's having some connection issues. So let's see if we can get her on. And if she drops off, I'll punt. But Wendy, any thoughts?
Good evening. I'm Wendy Morton from Career and Technical Education. Can you please restate the question? I didn't really hear the question.
Maybe I'll phrase it in just a little bit different way. So there is a legislative request that's currently pending, and there's 3 options within that. And I think it presents the idea that CTE has been shortchanged on the add-on. Hope I'm understanding this correctly. I'm trying to reflect that into this, into the, I forgot what it's called. Return on, ROI, on this ROI. Is there any way that we can put that in there? Or ask a question that leads to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how that fits into the ROI question and examples. So I would say my first thought is that if you're looking at our performance measures, and if you were to look at participation in CTE programs, we continue to see an increase of students participating in CTE programs throughout the state. When it comes to the dollar amount that's related to how many WPUs the CTE add-on program is funded each year from the legislature, that has continued, that really has not increased in a way that aligns with the amount of growth that CTE has experienced in student participation. So student participation has exceeded the amount of growth that CTE add-on dollars have received, have increased from the legislature over the years. And based off our description in the business case, in 2017, CTE add-on funds received a significant decrease in the number of WPUs that were funded to that program. And as of now, even as of this year, we have not reached that 2017 WPU level, even this year. So essentially, dollars are being spread more thinly across the state, simply because of the increased number of LEAs. as well as the number of schools that are opening. I don't
So
know if that,
short-term outcomes does hit that. It looks like maybe it's here. Can you see that, Wendy? The
I'm
short-term
sorry.
outcomes.
You were kind of breaking up, Brent.
Can you hear me now?
so short, yes.
The short-term outcome seems to cover exactly what you're talking about. So maybe there is the alignment in the questions here between the business case and the return on investment. So we just need to quantify that some way. And I guess that's what the three options are, but I guess I need to understand those three options better in the end, so that I feel like I'm making the best choice possible in regards to that funding request.
Okay. And I had a question, and I think this is probably for Director Longhurst, and it's just going to show all my ignorance. So, just bear with me here for a minute. But on the section where the short-term outcomes are listed, and the top bullet is number of students participating in CTE, and then the bottom bullet is number of certifications earned by students. I would like to see, as the money grows, are we just getting more students participating in these now even more cooler programs than they ever could have dreamed of? Or are we seeing kind of an equivalent number of certifications? I tried to put my head in the space of a sophomore, let's say, that this is now available to them. And I would just think they would be like a kid in a candy store with all these really cool classes that they take. But, in order to get a certificate, you have to get on a pathway and move towards that certification. So, to me, I would want to see that, everything goes up, not just the number of students participating. Is that where you're seeing this go, or is that something we can track, or do we track?
Yes, absolutely. That is an excellent bit of insight. In CTE, as probably most of our programs at USBE, we track a lot of data points. We're required to report to the Federal Department of Education very specific data points for our own purposes, for our state legislature. We track a lot of data points. Number of students participating is really that first level. How many students are taking CTE classes? But really from there, our main goal is getting students not just taking random classes, but as you articulated, it's taking a sequence of courses leading them down the pathway to different career fields. Not that they can't change if they decide they didn't like something, not that they're committing and signing in blood that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of their lives, but if they have some ideas about what they want to do and what they want to study and where they want to end up for a career, they have opportunities while they're in high school to connect with a sequence of courses, additional knowledge and skills, certifications and credentials, and connecting with post-secondary opportunities after they leave high school that will really further them down that road to their career. And that is the goal. And we have any number of data points that we track.
Good.
Let me just, if I may, introduce you to two terms. They're not my most favorite terms, but they're terms from our federal law that we track: concentrators and completers. Concentrators really is a student reaches concentrator status. And Wendy, shake your head. These are newer definitions for us. And I want to make sure my brain has moved to the newer definitions. So concentrator completes 3 courses. No, 1.5, 1 course. What is it, Wendy? Put up a number. 2 courses. Thank you. I was all around it. 2 courses within a CTE pathway. Those are articulated, aligned, specified courses at specific levels. And then to be a completer, it actually doesn't mean they've completed the pathway for all intents and purposes. They still have other things to do. But in terms of high school data points, They take 3 courses, right, Wendy? Shake your head. No, gosh dang it, what is it now?
Credit.
3 credits, thank you. That's what I meant to say. 3 credits within a CTE pathway. So we measure those, and our main goal is to increase the number of concentrators and completers, students who are using their time while they're in high school to further their knowledge and skills in particular areas, to move on and be ready for the rest of their lives.
And I think exploration to a point is great. But yeah, but it does need to start focusing on something. Okay, so another question, and I sounds like you probably are like 10 years ahead of me on this one too. So, but when we talk about them making, you know, that there are now, you know, there are other opportunities available past our high school certificates. Do we get information from those different groups on how many of these students are then going on to achieve additional additional degrees or certificates or whatever those next pathways might lead to? Or does it just like, oh, we sure hope they went out and got a great career in?
Yeah, if they do it while they're in high school, we have ways to track that. If they're, let's say they're in high school and they're taking courses over at the local technical college or university, we have ways to track that information and know about what's happening. Once they leave our system, though, it is a little more difficult. We rely on some self-reporting measures that we ask our LEAs to track. That is much more difficult, and our numbers certainly are not accurate as much as we would hope.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful. Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I'm sorry, all I
Chair
have
Moss.
is play chime or recognize hand gestures. I don't know
Hands
what-
are great.
I get the chime. I'm along the same lines, and I guess one question I have, when we say number of certifications, do we have any quality measures in terms of certifications? Among the data points we gather, is there anything that indicates the quality of learning beyond the top line fact of certification that we might look at as a performance measure?
So the quality of learning, is that what you asked for, Chair
Well, yeah,
Moss?
does a certification, mean that you learned what you need to learn? I think going to Chair Norton's question and to Member Straight's question, we're sort of looking at ultimate outcomes, right? So participation is kind of an intermediate outcome. Certification is a more long-term productive outcome. Within that, do we know, are there any other measures that capture whether that certification includes demonstration of mastery? Are there sub-indicators of that? Anything else that, other than that top line measure of certification earned?
Well, maybe I'll approach it from a kind of a backwards view and then give you an example. What we control very closely is the quality of the certification itself. We don't
Gotcha.
just give credit for any random certification that a kid decides to give us, right? We control a list of what we accept as certifications for high school students. That has to be tied to employers and industry partners recognizing that credential to be of value for students. And those credentials and certifications really are designed to show that the student has mastered the knowledge and skills being taught in that program or in that course. And I'll give you an example, if I may. We've been working really closely with our fire science programs, and in Salt Lake City and in Unified Fire departments, they have now changed their entire hiring process to give a separate and unique hiring process for students who come out of the programs, the high school programs, that they actually give preference to those students who have demonstrated through credentials and certifications that they have mastered the knowledge and skills. And they now have preference, and they have longitudinal data to show that they have a 95% retention rate for students who took those programs in high school, going on and becoming firefighters and staying with the agencies that hire them in.
Gotcha. Chair, quick follow-up and then
Of course.
I'll wrap. So that's kind of a quality control measure that we exercise on the question of certification itself. And I guess my question is, if we were looking at some of those quality measures, are any of those available as performance measures that could be tied to funding? Or do we only have the top line data on certifications earned?
So part of the formula that add-on goes out to the LEAs by includes certifications. It is a count, it is a relative proportion of all students earning certifications across the state, but part of how they earn that flow through add-on money is based on certifications.
My question is whether there are sub items of data that indicate quality below the top line measure of certifications themselves. Do we have any other quality indicators of student learning? Or is it just the fact that they have a certification and then we separately have the quality control measures for certification? Does that make sense? I mean, for example, if we were looking at graduation rates, we could look at a diploma, but we could also look at the ACT score and AP credits, right? Are there sub-measures of quality of learning below the certification that we might look to as performance measures?
Yeah, I understand your question, Wendy, unless you can think of something, nothing is coming to my mind. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, yes, actually. So we actually report on academic achievement for CTE concentrators, as well as placement in for CTE concentrators tied to our federal reporting. So there are a number of performance indicators that we look at. We look at language arts achievement, mathematics and science, and as well as work-based learning experiences within LEAs and placement. So there are some for federal reporting that we do on an annual basis that CTE concentrators specifically, that information is reported, or we collect that information to report out annually. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. That gets a little bit more complex and rich in terms of seeing if the funding is producing indicators of quality education experience. I guess I just wonder if that might be an included performance measure and whether that would require a motion to add it here, as we're just discussing. Again, I don't want to take over the discussion, but thank you for letting me explore that. I think that might be something to think about. But Chair, back to you. I just wanted to explore. I don't know if we're taking motions or just kind of working through things.
Chief of Staff Young, what would you recommend there?
So I think it would be helpful if there are additional measures that we'd like added. Two thoughts on that. One is I wonder if we could add those items to short-term outcomes, even though I do appreciate they're long-term in nature. That just allows us to differentiate which of those are captured in the performance measure setting and those that are just specific to board level interest. So I don't know if there's any feedback on that. If we included it in that third column as opposed to the fourth, or we could create a new box for long-term measures that are not performance measures that could also be included.
Yeah, we could change that to just outcomes. Vice Chair Davis.
Would that give us the information that this is all about ROI, right? And the academic indicators are basically literacy, mathematics, and science scores that are scored in standards that aren't necessarily the CTE standards, if I'm understanding correctly. So, I can see how it might sound nice to put them in, and I don't know what the federal government wants them for, other than to maybe just show that those in CTE maybe are above average or below average, but not falling because they take a CTE class. I have no idea. But it doesn't really seem like it would be an indicator for ROI. I mean, these are so vocationally focused that it seems like the field placement would be a much greater indicator, and retention rates in the field of success of these particular more vocational pathways and course opportunities. But I could be wrong. Someone else could weigh in there.
And I didn't catch that if these are non-CTE measures, so. What are
Deputy,
CTE measures?
Deputy Superintendent Jones?
Yeah, so I've received a couple of texts, so I'm hoping that this will benefit the group as a whole. So the number one question that business administrators get, or I get, is as the value of the WPU has increased over the years, so has the amount of the CTE add-on from state funds, right? I think we all agree to that. So the question that we get is, has that money made a difference in the two areas, participation and CTE student competency? And how do we measure the competency piece? That's the question we get that relates to ROI is, well, we've increased the value of the WPU, and so therefore the CTE add-on or state portion of CTE funding is increased. So I do think that we've seen participation increase. Is that right? Yes, okay. But then are we also correlating the increases to the amount of funding that's increased the add-on portion to CTE? Has that raised competency levels of our students, and how have they measured, and how do we know that? How do we measure that? Is the amount increases to the CTE add-on making a difference in the competency levels of students, as you articulated as an example for the firefighters, right? And how, or are we just taking the certifications from the LEAs and doing that? Is there a direct correlation or not between the amounts of the increases in the CTE add-on as a result of the increases in the value of the WPU to the competency levels? Are students getting more jobs? Are they getting more? That's the specificity of the questions that we get. I hope that helps. Over.
Sarah, would you like me to comment?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, thank you.
You bet. So year over year, participation continues to increase, as does the percentage and number of students the percentage and number of students who both concentrate and complete CTE pathways. Now, let me pause there and say that in 2019, Perkins 5 was authorized, which changed, as I've clearly articulated earlier today, which changed the definitions of concentrator and completer. So our numbers have to reset because the definitions did change significantly. So while we're not back up to where we were in Perkins 4, we are rising, and you're seeing that year over year. And then in terms of certifications, those numbers are also increasing year over year. Without hesitation, we continue to see that grow. I am a little concerned about using placement as a measure of outcome for CTE for one reason only. It is self-reported by students who we can get to respond, whether that be phone calls that the LEAs make, whether that be emails that are sent out, surveys trying to get students to respond. They'll even go so far as, you know, if you're in a small rural LEA, maybe the counselor or a teacher or the CT director sees a family member in the grocery store and they ask, how is little Johnny doing? What's he up to these days? And then they go back and mark the placement data based on what the family member reports. But it is not 100%. It is a relatively smaller proportion of students that we actually know about. Many of them will leave on LDS missions. That is not a number that we track for federal reporting purposes. So we have that. Our window for placement is October to December after the student graduates. And so as we know, many of those students could be out on a mission anywhere else. It's just not, it's not the most reliable of numbers to show what students are doing, at least the vast majority of them.
Well, and along those same lines, I hear frequently of students who get these certificates and then they go on to, university study. They're using that certificate to put themselves through their university classes, but, technically are they, out of that now? And so I can see that that could be a little interesting in the survey. That is tough. Hey, I see oh, yes, I see a hand. Thank you, thank you, Chair Moss.
Just real quick then. So if we were to look at measures of competence, achievement, we could look at, I think, and Vice Chair Davis mentioned a couple. Placement might be one. I think some of the federal data you mentioned, I guess I misunderstood, is not necessarily a measure of competence in CTE. Rather, it's in English and math to see whether that competence in other areas was somehow diluted by participation or enhanced by participation in CTE. But I mean, I think what we're trying to find here is just the best measures that students completed something, but also developed competence, excellence towards success. And I guess what would those be then from this discussion? Perhaps placement indicates that they've at least gone to the next step. Internal measures of competence beyond certification. I mean, what would we say would be those primary measures then of competence and learning as outcomes?
Well, again, if you were asking me, participation, you could add in concentration and completion of CTE pathways while they're in high school. That assumes, maybe is a word, that the student is learning and becoming more competent over time. And then certifications is a measure of mastery. The only way, and I say this mostly tongue-in-cheek, but truly the only way for us to accurately measure placement would be to collect Social Security numbers, which none of us want to do. But that is the only way that I can track through USHE, through DWS, any of those things to get accurate numbers through government systems about what students might be doing if they stay in state. Once they leave the state, I have no way of tracking.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I think for me, part of this is the assumes word. And I think certification does assume a certain development, but we say the same thing about graduation. And then we also look at disparities between proficiency and graduation, right? And so that's, I think, what I'm trying to dig at. Is there the other measures of competence? But it's been a good discussion. I'm not sure if there's another measure that might be added that gets beneath the presumption. Maybe Vice Chair Davis has it. So thank you for letting me explore this. I appreciate the discussion. I think it's precisely the kind of discussion that this exercise invites.
Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I think it's tricky when you're looking at academic or growth measures because we, since, No Child Left Behind, have traditionally kind of followed in the federal government requirements of math, literacy, and science. And then Utah has actually added more than what's required in the federal government in 2 grades of science. So I think we don't even know if we're getting a bang for our buck with, let's say, social studies, which is considered a core class. We don't have any sort of common statewide assessment in that area. So I think it could be kind of tricky unless there's very specific common assessments in every single CTE area. And you could look at data across the whole system. You know, it's going to be, I think that what we're asking for here is some academic measures, but I think it's going to be a bit tricky to do that. For this one.
Hey, seeing no other hands, back to you, Ms. Sarah Young.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to our next program. I will just reflect, we do appreciate the questions and the dialogue related to the outcome measures, what's possible, why staff have selected what we have. These are the real great opportunities for us to consider, are there additional measures that we could add, and what are the pros and cons to those measures? So again, thank you for engaging in that. I think that's really what we are looking for. So with that, I will move on to the School Land Trust Program. And for this particular item, we do have a Director, Paula Plant, who is with us. For short-term outcomes, just to highlight the specific items related to this program, we do have and have identified parental involvement in academic decisions in every Utah public school, increasing local revenue stream to address the unique needs of each school, increasing the number of compliant schools meeting fall, winter, and spring due dates to receive funding before the school year begins, and reduction of annual carryover indicating plans were implemented as approved. In the long-term performance measures, I will just share that this was actually a really great conversation with Director Plant and the rest of our staff. For performance measures, you'll note that this program has actually selected several. And the reason for selecting all of these is just recognizing the real diversity of schools that the Land Trust Program addresses. And so to be able to capture the goal of providing resources to improve academic outcomes, you'll see that there's both a percentage increase in high school graduation rate, recognizing the role that this program plays at the high school level. And then as well, the percent of 1st through 8th grade students demonstrating adequate growth in ELA, as well as demonstrating adequate growth in mathematics. And then a final component related to equitable distribution of resources across LEAs. This is one where we seek to assess the number of LEAs that are engaged in the program and in relationship to those who are potentially eligible. So with that, we do have Director Plant here with us and open to any questions or feedback about these outcomes related to the School Land Trust Program.
Go ahead, Director Plant.
I'm sorry. So I guess are there questions? I'm sorry. I think Sarah has explained our process and how those performance measures actually happen. They're collected annually as a school reports their progress according to the goals that they set at the beginning of the year. So unless you have questions.
I'm not seeing any.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Norton, it looks like we have Board Member Davis with a hand raised.
Thank you. I did not see that.
You didn't, because I have like this 3-step steps to get my hand up, and I apologize. I was wanted before it went. Will someone let us know? This feels like kind of a hybrid conversation for this one. I know some of these we're gonna blend into just kind of an opportunity for feedback if anyone has any, but will someone let us know? Because some of these actually combined with motions that are potential for the committee, and there may be potential code changes that need to happen or rule changes. And is someone gonna say, look, on this one, this one's really just a feedback discussion, and on this one, we really are kind of seeking a motion in this area because we have to fix this thing in code or whatever. Is someone gonna kind of talk to us about that as
Chair.
with each one?
Chair, if I may.
Please.
So, thank you for that question. And, our approach that we, were planning on was to address each of the outcomes for all the programs and then do a comprehensive, here's the list of potential policy considerations that were captured, across all the programs so that you could then see them holistically and make a decision about within the months leading up to legislation where you wanted to focus your time. We can certainly do it program by program. I just wanted to be mindful of the fact that I'll use school land trust as our example. If school land trust was like, well, these are the things that I think the board should consider, and that resonates with you, and then in 4 slides you hear from SOEP another list of 10 items that you're like, well, wait, those resonate with me too, that you had an opportunity to kind of consider it collectively to make decisions about what those priorities might look like. With that said, if it's helpful, I can certainly address each of them as we go through each program, just so that it's in the back of your mind, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, may I follow up, Chair?
Yes.
I think it would be helpful also to know which suggested motions are just ROI types of improvements and which this happened in code and it has to change in rule at some point. There's a time frame on it, or you've got 5 months to consider it. You don't have to do anything today. But if there are things that are timely and that don't necessarily have to do with ROI, I know there's at least one that someone points that out when we get to the big grand list at the end. That would be helpful. Thank you.
You bet. And maybe to help, Chair, and with your direction and support, we could share that list of program by program considerations that I believe we shared with you through Cami Wilcox, so that your fellow committee members could consider that as we're working our way through the conversation. Would it be okay if we emailed that out?
It definitely would be okay. I don't know that I would prefer not taking actions at this time though, but let's look at them and be putting them together. I do think that we do need to look at the holistic group because there's too many here to do it all. And, we need to decide kind of a prioritizing strategy. But yeah, I think that's a great idea to send that out.
Excellent.
Just point of information. Question, Chair, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. You say, I don't prefer to take action. Is that item by item and take action at the end or at all today?
Well, I think that's for us to see, but I would like to wait to the end till we get it all there and see if we've got enough information to take action.
Got it. Thank you.
Chair
Norton,
Yeah.
Yes,
I have my hand up.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Go ahead,
real-
Member Straight.
Just real quick, there's a grammatical error on the second line of the problem statement. Not a big deal. So that's it. I really like this, by the way.
Thank you for flagging it. We will certainly revisit that. Okay. Well, with no other questions related to school land trust, we will move on. So our next item, and I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit on this one. I appreciate the text is small. There is so much to talk about whenever we talk about the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Learning Program. So for this specific item, you'll see that short-term outcomes is in very much in alignment with a lot of the efforts of staff and research to be able to demonstrate outcomes of this particular program that have occurred over time. So for short-term outcomes for the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Learning Arts Program, we do have measure of new schools added. We also would be looking at the year-over-year improvement in academic assessment for every school in the program. Currently, there is a UEPC research report that speaks to that comprehensively. Improve student engagement and interest and increase durable skills, improve school culture and school community engagement, equitable access to arts learning and arts integration experiences for all school students in a school, BTS arts students demonstrating increased arts competency in arts core subjects, and in many instances deliver the only arts instruction in school, and then students continuing with arts engagement into secondary grades and lifelong arts engagement. In addition to that, you'll note, and it is hyperlinked, we do have access to the annual assurance impact report that has those additional measures, as well as the survey tools related to learning school culture and family involvement, so that you as board members, depending on your interest, can go and see how that data is being gathered and assessed. In terms of performance measure alignment, again, this is one of those programs where, because it is implemented across multiple academic areas, it's going to have a few more alignment components for performance measures. The percent of students in grades 1 through 12 in public schools that are chronically absent is one of the measures as it relates to the learning school culture and engagement component. The percent of students proficient on science in grades 4 through 8 on RISE or DLM, as well as for ELA in the same grades and mathematics. And then as well, the measures specific to students making typical or better progress on Acadience reading, as well as Acadience math. And so those are going to be, it's again going to have more performance measures just related to the fact that this particular program does serve a wider group of students in our elementary setting. So we do have Lori Bajewski here with us today, who is available to answer any questions or take feedback related to the outcome measures that have been proposed. So Chair, we'll turn it over to you in case there's any questions from the committee.
I am not seeing any questions right this moment. Yes, I am seeing a question right now. Member Bogus, thank you. I love that hand.
Oh, I appreciate it. Just as everybody's having hand troubles, I guess I had them the same. So I do have a question about this one, in particular, because this is on the list, very likely to move forward when the conversation with the governor. And so I would like to move this forward in a motion so that we make certain that we hit both of those things and then we don't have to backpedal after the fact. Is that something we need to discuss now? Wait to the end to make certain that we hit that? What are your thoughts?
If we could just make sure this gets on our list and then we can address it at the end, I think that would be the way that we're going to try going forward today. So,
okay, so
Can
we'll
we
have an
make sure-
opportunity to make that motion at the end.
yeah, so
Okay,
Cammie, you make sure that that's on our motion list, and I do see it on the motion list now, so I think we'll be there. So, yep, we're
Okay.
good.
I appreciate you, and I'm going to, I don't believe I have any questions. I do see Ms. Bajewski here. Always good to see you. If she has anything to say, I have no clue. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. If Ms. Bajewski would like to comment, we always love hearing from you, Lori.
Thank you. Chair Norton. Actually, I think Deputy Sarah Young really outlined the really broad, the breadth of the performance measures that we hold the program to and the standards in which we've been doing year over year assessments, on the program. And so I think actually the short term and the performance measures as outlined kind of speak for themselves. So I can take any granular questions, but I think it was really well laid out.
I do have a question. And maybe I'm just not seeing it on one of these lists at this point, but do we have anything tied to BTS schools as opposed to non-BTS schools on that we can see any changes or any differentiation in behavior?
Oh, wow, that's an awesome question, Chair Norton. At this juncture, we do not, we haven't done that comparison. We are looking at, in the future, doing some benchmarking with new schools as they enter the program and looking at their performance measures, from when they started the program toward, and then years later, what that improvement is. But at this, we're not capturing that data. But I'm going to put it in the sandbox because we should.
Well, yeah, and I just look at it and I think I realize that, is such a subjective item, but I mean, I would be willing to say, I know it makes a difference. Students that are having art and music in school at least once a week have but maybe I'm wrong, but I would love to see at some point if someone somewhere can find a way to use that as evidence, but we shall see. At this point, it's not. We'll leave it at that.
And causation is hard to measure. And you're right, the arts are very hard to measure. And we are looking at mixed methods. So looking at qualitative as well as quantitative measures, because they both matter, as we know.
Yeah.
And that first performance measure, I think, is really critical.
Oh, yeah.
Of looking at chronic absenteeism.
Right. The very, very, very true. Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments. So back to you, Chief.
Okay, we will keep going. So we are now going to get into a series of 3 ROI logic models that all fall under the umbrella of our statewide online education program. And this is so more commonly referred to under its acronym SOEP. For this, we do have Quinn Kellis, who is with us as our SOEP lead and expert. So with that, I'm going to start off with the first program, which is the Home and Private School Student Participation. You will notice that this particular logic model is a little bit different because of the specific population of students that are being served by this funding stream and our access to data or lack thereof related to some of these specific outcomes. We do not have a standing agency system performance measure report that is expected of the agency related to service to home and private school students because their education for the most part is outside of the purview and the systems that we've established at USBE as part of the K-12 public school system. With that, I will highlight that the statutory measures for short-term outcomes are the percent of students completing online courses in the agreed upon period, as well as the pupil-teacher ratio for the combined online courses as part of our kind of short-term measures related to this specific funding stream. You will note under performance measures, we do clarify that the board does not collect or report outcomes describing home home or private school students at this time. So I will pause in case there's any questions or feedback about this approach for Quinn Kellis or any other members of our team.
I see Vice Chair Davis.
Thank you. Do we have, it seems like we would have data for homeschool students, but maybe not private school students, because the homeschool students are actually enrolled in a course with a teacher through the state online programs versus private schools, who I think mostly are working through ASU. But could we ask Director Kellis to help us understand that a little bit more?
Thank you. Yes, Director Kellis, if you could help us, that'd be great.
Good afternoon. I'm Quinn Kellis. I am the lead administrator for the State Online Education Program and the School Leadership Development Coordinator. So to Member Davis's point, we have opportunities for home and some independent private school students to take courses through our general education SOEP providers. We collect information for all the students from those 6 providers. The 7th one is the ASU Digital Prep Global, which services the private schools. But we do have students from home and a few private who are currently enrolled in our mainstream providers.
So may I follow up, Chair?
Yes, please.
So do we have outcomes for those students who are enrolled in ours, or is it written into the law that we can't collect any of those outcomes, or are we just not getting outcomes from ASU, or how does that work?
So yes, we don't collect the data for the private school students who are in the ASU program. As far as the other students, yes, we could collect data on those.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and because I just don't know, on the funded FTEs, it mentions that no FTEs are associated with the administration of this program, that they're kind of all intermingled together. Can you give me, in your view, Director Kellis, what would you say is the advantage to doing that, and what would be the disadvantage, or, you know?
Thank you, Chair Norton. When it says no funded FTEs associated with administration, we have a team the SOEP team that manages the entire SOEP program. There are just not any dedicated funds specific to home and private schools. So while you see a list of FTEs here of staff members and their titles, those titles are servicing all the different elements of the SOEP program.
So is what you're saying is you have educational specialists and program specialists and program coordinators for the home and private, but the people are actually they're not receiving funding for that, or they're not dedicated to that, or what kind of explain that a little bit more?
So the FTEs are funded for the entire SOEP program. Home and private is currently a part of that program, so they benefit from the FTEs that are currently used for the whole program. In other words, we have public school students we have the 6 providers, we have small schools, and we have the home and private. It's the same staff that service all those different elements of the SOEP program. In some cases, there are FTE funds that fund people out of legislatively mandated, when we say unfunded mandates, well, sometimes we get funding from those mandates. And so some of the employees have dedicated funding through legislative allocations. But generally, everybody here on the team is paid to run the entire program, and there are no home and private specific funds to pay for any one FTE.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to reach back into gray matter that might be dead.
Sure.
If I remember correctly, though, isn't the largest portion of the SOEP funding set aside for home and private, with just a small amount for the small schools in general?
So when you put small schools in the same category funding as the home and private, yes, you're correct. Home and private has an overwhelming multiplied funding revenue versus the small schools. When you put all of the students, including the public school students, and that is not the case. The public school students overwhelmingly have the largest, the biggest budget. But when you put home, private, and small schools all on the same scale, then yes, home and private, I mean, private really, but yes, home and private has the majority of the funds.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And I was missing a rather large piece there. So I appreciate you bringing that out. Thank you. And I
You're very
see
welcome.
Vice Chair Davis has her hand up.
Yeah, I have a question about the funding notes here. So it says that the private school classes are offered in person at the school, taught by the teacher at the school, but we send the money to the SOEP provider. So are they just, how is that working? They're just basically sending curriculum or content? Because that seems more like it would be a curriculum purchase. And then I think, so it seems to me that if they're going to move this to a contractor, that it would benefit them actually to move it out of the SOEP program and into, like, say, the Utah Fits All or something. Because if this is true, that many or most are being taught by the teacher at the school, but they're just using the SOEP umbrella as curriculum, then it should be a different thing. It shouldn't really be SOEP. And also, because it's SOEP, that's probably precluding them from using Utah Fits All, because I think there's that preclusion in code. So it seems like it would add clarity to the whole SOEP program to have SOEP be truly an online class taught by an online teacher. And then this private program, maybe this same amount of funds, so they don't lose their whatever funds, put under the Utah Fits All umbrella. Or it seems like that would be a more accurate description of what's happening if this is accurate.
Chair Norton, may I respond?
Thank you. Yes.
So, Member Davis, thank you for bringing up those funding notes and that clarification. For several years, the private schools under ASU Digital Prep Global as the provider have had what we call a hybrid program, meaning that they are students who are in a classroom sitting in a desk with a live teacher in front of them, and the content, according to the arrangement, is provided by ASU Digital Prep Global. We don't have any way to verify what the private schools, the teachers in the classrooms are doing with that content. But the funding goes to the provider, who's SU Digital Prep Global. As you noted in the second bullet there, according to HB 247 in the last legislative session, all of the home and private part of the SOEP program must be transferred to a contractor who will manage those enrollments. The question prevails if that contractor is going to be, well, just really how independent that contractor will be from SOEP and the board. You'll note in some of the recommendations on slide 4 of this one, that is a question that is one for the board to have a conversation about, and perhaps legislation may be needed to drive some more clarity on what role the contractor will have moving forward. But as of right now, by April 1st of 2025, the home and private portion of SOEP must be under a contractor. That's about 6 months.
May I follow up, Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I think we should probably be thinking about, at the end of this, seeking some clarity legislatively, or we're requesting that this be its own program with its own name, because if they're not having a teacher teaching an online course, it's not really the SOEP program. So just a thought, might help add clarity for all the parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Bogus.
Sorry, I actually have nothing to say. I'm cheering on Member Davis. I think she made all my points for me, and her follow-up question is exactly what I wanted to say. So that's
Okay,
all.
makes sense.
Chair Norton, could I just make one more comment?
Yes, please do.
To Member Davis's point about legislation, the SOEP program recently had a legislative audit conducted. And in that report that was released just last month, there was a recommendation or a suggestion, it didn't come as a formal recommendation, that the legislature consider the hybrid nature of any online programs that are funded through SOEP.
All right, Chair, with your
Yeah.
support, we'll move on to the next sub-program for SOEP. I do appreciate that we have about 35 minutes left. And so as we move through these pieces, I'll just make a note for staff that we're trying to keep on going so that they do have an opportunity related to the action component. So this next one is our statewide online education program for public school student participation. For this one, I will note for short-term outcomes. Similarly, we have % of students completing online courses in the agreed upon period, pupil-teacher ratio for combined online courses, scores of participating students on state mandated assessments, and then for performance measure alignment, you'll see % of students in grades 6 through 12 in public schools that are chronically absent in terms of being able to address that component, as well as the 4-year cohort graduation rate, noting that alignment of SOEP with helping students have various learning opportunities to be able to meet graduation requirements and expectations. So with that, if there are any questions or feedback related to the public school student component of SOEP, again, we have Quinn Kellis to answer those.
And unless I'm not seeing them, I'm not seeing any hands.
Okay, I will continue because we do have one more SOEP program. And so this is going to be specific to the statewide online education program funding stream that is specific to small public high school support. So again, this is a separate funding line that funds the same program, but targeted explicitly at our smaller high school opportunities that often based on size and geographics don't necessarily have access to as many of the diverse course options that some of our larger and more urban high schools sometimes do. So as a part of that, they have their own funding stream to be able to specifically offer opportunities in the SOEP space to students enrolled in those schools. Again, you'll see in short-term outcomes, we're going to have the same short-term outcomes as we proposed for the public school students, just specific to the subpopulation of students who are in these small schools participating in the program. And then performance measure alignment. For this one, we have, in addition to the previously proposed chronically absent, which you'll see here is fourth, and the 4-year cohort graduation rate. We also have a measure related to percent of students in Utah participating in readiness coursework, again, trying to address that specific need of providing additional access to students in these small schools with multiple pathways and options, as well as the percent of courses taught by appropriately licensed and endorsed educators. So again, one of the goals being making sure that our students have an alignment between a licensed educator in these key areas that may be in addition to what that school community would be able to offer from the population within the geographic region. So again, if there's any questions or feedback, I'm happy to have Quinn Kellis share his expertise.
And I'm not seeing any.
Okay, I will note that for each of these programs, as per Board Member Davis's earlier question related to next steps, each of these individual funding streams for SOEP does have a separate set of potential action items related to legislative or board next steps that you may consider for the comprehensive needs of the program. I just like to call out that staff did an excellent job of recognizing each of these populations is a little bit different. The program needs are a little bit different. And so instead of trying to address it holistically as one SOEP, this was a really great opportunity to see what are the needs based on the individual funding streams and how the board ultimately wants to prioritize to investigate and learn more and potentially make recommendations for the future.
Vice Chair Davis.
I just want to note, and this is less to do with small school than probably larger schools. I mean, I think SOEP fills such a need in our small schools where they don't have access to a wide variety of teachers. But I did recently get an email from a principal of a high school who was really concerned because as more and more students use SOEP for flexibility within their schedule, the high school loses FTE, and he was saying, I don't think a lot of parents or students understand that the more students take online classes, the fewer programs we can offer here that they all like, I don't know, the ag programs or the FBLA or the future, whatever, or the extras things. So it's kind of this quandary because we have a short-term outcome of increasing completion of online courses, which would be really good for the SOEP program and students who want more flexibility. At the same time, it may cause them to lose flexibility and options at their neighborhood school. And again, we've got up on the screen small schools, and this is more particular to large, but just something to keep in our minds of how we sort of navigate through this space and keep both healthy, the SOEP program and the opportunities for students in their neighborhood schools as well. So thank you. And their charter schools too. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excellent. Chair, if you're amenable, we'll move to the next program.
Okay, that would be great.
Okay, we do have two more just to demonstrate our intent to get you across the finish line. So our next program is going to be kindergarten, which I know Board Member Straight did ask a question about at the beginning related to the problem statement, and then how that aligns with outcomes. I will note that for short-term outcomes, our staff are proposing increased proficiency for kindergarten on Acadian's reading and math. Also increased percentage of students attending full-day kindergarten based on October 1st head counts, and then percentage of LEAs offering full-day kindergarten to 100% of their community. In terms of the performance measures, this one is specific to a very specific measure we have in terms of systems reporting, which is the percentage of kindergarten students making typical or better progress on Acadian's reading and in reading and in math. So it looks like we have a minor duplication in that text. So it would be for reading and for math related to that Acadian's effort. And we do split those two into two separate outcome measures. So with that, we do have our expert, Christine Elegante, who is here with us to speak about kindergarten. If you have any thoughts or feedback, again, if there's anything Board Member Straight wanted to address, we have our expert here to respond.
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, I want to give appropriate wait time if
Okay.
Chair Norton, I believe Chair, Board
Yes.
Member Davis.
Vice Chair Davis, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize my microphone was on. That exhalation of breath was about myself, not anyone else. I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna speak again. I'm taking too much time. I just want to note on this, I think it's wonderful that we're giving more opportunity and options for parents to be able to choose. At the same time, this caused quite a stir in the kindergarten landscape. And when our teachers lost those days in the beginning where they can give the assessments to students and make a one-on-one connection and show them the bathroom and create this really low risk, gentle entry to kindergarten, now for the most part, they're all coming on day one. I have heard from plenty of kindergarten teachers that are having a hard time with it. So, gosh, when we have celebrations, we also have to kind of think through some unintended consequences. And I don't know that this is the place to do it or how to even solve that problem, but I'm just throwing it out there to the universe to say it might be a conversation that we have at some point as to how to create some consistency across the landscape and preserve some of that time if at all possible. Thanks.
Thank you for that feedback. I will just share, because it has been tentatively circulated as a draft among staff, that the staff with Christine and her team, they actually have some preliminary data related to some of these items and elements that may be of interest in a future board committee setting for you to be able to see some of those comparisons. I know that they're looking into, so what are the outcomes related to our first year in this space? And if there is interest in the future, you can certainly let us know in the action item space. And I know Christine and her experts would be happy to come back.
Okay, yep, that might be an important option.
Okay. With that, I will move to our last program, which is related to the school-based mental health screening. So this is one where actually the board will also be hearing about a related topic of school-related mental health funding streams in an upcoming education interim. So for this, for our short-term outcomes, we do have screening program data related to the number of students who were screened comparatively from a baseline year of 2021 to our most recent fiscal year 2024. To be able to demonstrate how the additional funds are being utilized to address some of the potential needs in the greater system. Additionally, we have the number of LEAs who are participating in this funding stream and screening opportunity. Again, a comparison baseline from FY 2021 to FY 2025. As far as the screening grant data goes, we also have a comparison of the number of LEAs that were awarded funding from a baseline year of fiscal year 2021 to fiscal year 2023 to demonstrate growth in those areas, as well as looking at, again, the number of students who were screened in FY 2024 and how many or what percentage of those students were screened in LEAs that received grant funding, so that you can see kind of the impact of the resource as it relates to the overall landscape. For performance measure alignment, we do have some specific aspects of the SHARP survey statewide data set that are called out related to 8th, 10th, and 12th grade students, looking at mental health, high treatment needs. So 2019, that percentage is identified by that tool was 19.3%. In 2023, it rose to 25%. We also have some additional data points related to that tool reporting on moderate depression, as well as plans to potentially engage in suicide or suicide-like ideation behavior. And again, you'll see that those metrics are shared here as it relates. So again, there's going to be a more in-depth conversation related to mental health needs at the upcoming education interim, where we'll have our staff experts. But we do have Tara Kay with us here today in case you have any thoughts or feedback related to these proposed short-term outcomes and performance measures.
And I am not seeing any hands, but let's give it a little wait time. A lot to read through.
Okay.
I do have one question. Are we seeing any correlation between, when I look at the 21 and the 24 screening information and 21 and 25, as we screen more, are those, I want to see if there's a correlation with attendance. If by screening, if we're helping kids attend school more frequently.
I think we can definitely, I don't have that current data, but I mean, that's something that we would have to look at the attendance data and then, maybe compare, with this data.
Yeah, and I realize it would be hard. I mean, I would hope that we could find that. I'd hope that maybe there was some way we could get that but I also realize, there are reasons for attending or not attending. are as varied as the blades of grass, and so I don't know that we can necessarily pin that down to, oh yeah, this increase in screening is helping or hurting. So that was kind of I'm sorry, I think I answered my own question there. Member Bogus.
Yes, ma'am. I am wondering if we have juxtaposed this data with the trending data that we're the happiest state in the nation. We have the happiest kids in the nation. And it's genuine. It's a genuine question. I'm not really being facetious, because this doesn't look like we're the happiest state in the nation. And so I'm going to leave it there. Have we juxtaposed that data? Have we looked at it? Do we know what that means to us in this context?
Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, so it's a good point. And actually, I will say that particular report came up in a recent news summary that I received in the email. And so I think it's important to recognize that a lot of times those assessments are done by outside entities, and we at USBE don't necessarily have access to their data and methodology to be able to do a direct kind of comparison and assessment to that. It's certainly something that we could look into in terms of what data sets are they using to be able to make those assessments of happiness. Sometimes they have a tool that they use that is given to a smaller group of the population. So I don't know if they'd be able to share that with us, but if it's an area of interest and the board wanted us to look into that, we certainly could.
Would you need a motion for that?
I think so, just related to the fact that we would be reaching out to another entity, asking for them to share data. And we would probably need to go through a process with them to establish an MOU. So it would be helpful to have board support for that, in terms of the time and effort to prepare it to bring back.
Okay. I will work something up. I don't know exactly what it will say, but I think it would be interesting, because this to me is very concerning, right? We all look at it and we have that concern, yet the public narrative is different. So I would love to explore that further. Thank you. I'll have something drafted for you, Sarah.
Great, thank you.
Vice Chair Davis.
I don't know that I need to make a motion on this, but it seems like the bottom bullet in the core strategies outputs might seem more appropriate to be in either the outcomes or the performance measures, because I just don't know that we're measuring success because our depression rates are increasing. We would measure success is how many parents became empowered with choices to know how to address the issues if they choose. I mean, that seems like the number of connections or the number of parents that were educated on their options available or resources, not in any way pressured. Of course, that choice would be theirs, but just that we did our part in connecting them to the help. Just a thought for the future.
Thank you for that feedback.
Hey, we can move on.
Okay, excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of the review of the draft ROI models. So thank you again for the feedback and the discussion related to each of these key programs. We as your staff do see potentially all of these programs, if not a significant number of them, could be brought up in a legislative setting. And so we appreciate that opportunity to get these before you early. So if there's additional data that we can have prepared for the board ahead of those conversations, that we're ready to go for that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and share the potential finance motion sheet that Kimmy Wilcox shared with each of you. in terms of items that the board may consider, I'm going to give a quick run through of what these are. And again, our goal is not to ask for you to take action on these today, but to help us as staff know which of these do you have interest in, so that we can then bring them back to you with additional information for future discussion. Obviously, you're not precluded from taking action today if there's those that have a large number behind them. But I did just want to clarify that we as your staff are not asking you to take action on all of them. So please let us know what makes sense. For CTE, you will notice that the one remaining item from the action that the committee took in the September Finance Committee meeting was to consider updating the board rule from unrestricted to restricted indirect costs rates. So that is still on the table related to that particular program. For the school land trust program, there was a conversation but no action related to continuing with the common needs assessment effort for a school level at the agency to reduce duplication and needs assessments across various programs. For the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program, that the committee could consider updating the board rule 490 for BTSA to add a second distribution to the current fiscal year 25 uniform amount allocations in alignment with some of the earlier finance discussion. I will also note we drafted based on board member Bogus's reference earlier that you could consider supporting the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts and Pops legislative funding request. I will say that I did take liberty to interpret board member Bogus your intent, so please correct me if I miscaptured that. Additionally, for the statewide online education program, home and private school participation, we do have consideration for providing direction on services delivered in the hybrid environment, as was discussed before. Additionally, providing direction on allowance for provider payments that are specific to a single private school that is facilitating the coursework, but is not available to the larger home and private school student community beyond those that are currently enrolled in that private school, and then potentially requesting staff to work with legislative experts to develop a clarification on the relationship between the board and the future contractor that will be required to administer this program. Additionally, for public school student participation, there are additional opportunities for direction related to credit recognition, given the statutory requirements for a primary LEA to incorporate SOEP credit into student membership. Direction on the 6 credit limit for yearly SOEP enrollment, where that limit could be exceeded if additional online courses better meet the academic goals of a student, providing direction on the obligation to attend physical courses if a fully online course is available, direction on repealing code for LEAs to request reduced fee structure, noting that all of our LEAs historically have aligned with the fee structure available or negotiated at the state level, and the potential unnecessary nature of that code, and then direction on opportunity for youth and care to potentially have access to this program, which would be an expansion beyond the current service model. Finally, for statewide online education program for small public high school student support, the board may consider providing direction to amend code to allow middle school students in small schools to also enroll in high school SOEP coursework. Ask for a study to whether the funding is adequate based on LEA demonstrated need and requests for access. And then also consider this program in alignment with another pending legislative funding request for consideration of an SIS system at the statewide level or solutions in that space to allow for a consolidated SOEP administration at the agency that integrates some of the existing components components of the SEATS program, as well as providing additional transparency for student records to parents and school personnel who may be taking some programs from SOEP, some from their local high school, and maybe even some from a different high school, depending on course availability and pieces like that, and creating a more singular, coherent record for informing future graduation purposes. For kindergarten, there was one key request, which was related to some questions that our staff have gotten related to students who may enroll in another state in kindergarten, who then come to our state but don't meet the age requirement threshold, and some of the discrepancies between those students then being asked to delay and wait for their age eligibility here in Utah, even though they had started kindergarten in their prior state. For school-based mental health screening, there's opportunities related to working with legislative experts to require screenings to be completed by qualified personnel, potentially directing staff to work with legislative experts on a board rule to require the personnel to be trained on specific tools for screening chosen by the LEAs, so making sure that training component is completed. And then last but not least, directing staff to work with legislative experts to transition the funding from a formula grant back to a competitive grant process to support additional resources, potentially for smaller LEAs and charter schools. This funding model was shifted in a previous legislative session, and there could be opportunities for consideration of if the board wanted to make a recommendation that we go back to the competitive funding model, depending on the board's interest in that conversation. So I appreciate that is a lot. And again, we're not asking for action on all of these items, but for feedback on, are there any of these items that you as a committee would like us to bring back to you in a future meeting that we as staff can prioritize for your discussion and consideration?
Chief of Staff Young, I would like to recommend on that CTE add-on that's right there at the top, that we request that staff work with our LEA leadership to see the consequences, intended or unintended, of this change from unrestricted to restricted indirect.
Or multi-size LEAs.
Thank you. Multi-sized LEA leadership. Or a variety of.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Okay, we got into this in our last meeting. I don't know that we got to any sort of an answer, and I think that it is quite important that, you know, that we do talk to those people who are paying these different bills and making these decisions. And so that's why I would propose this. Is this something we would need to do in a motion?
We're happy to take it as a motion to allow us to prioritize that work, and then to be able to bring it back to you in a future finance committee, if that's
okay. Then I will move that as a motion. Can I do it that way, Chair? Can I just move that? Or do I need to repeat it? Chair Moss?
I think you did it.
Okay.
That's to me.
All right, any questions or comments on this particular? Okay, go ahead and please vote.
Chair, I'm a yes. I have tried every suggestion folks have kindly texted me. I'm not getting my buttons fixed.
Okay, it looks like that passed unanimously. All right. Board Member Bogus.
Thank you, ma'am. I would move that, oh, sorry. I'm still on my, my thing here with Miss Sarah. I would move that the Finance Committee recommend to the board, that the board discuss and support a base funding formula for the BTS program as part of the request for the BTS program funding. I think I stated that backward. I move that the Finance Committee recommends that the board discuss and support a base plus funding formula for the BTS program as part of the request for the BTS, the funding request for the BTS program. And I don't know who's typing, but whoever is typing, I'm happy to text this to you.
So, Board Member Bogus, I'm the one who's entering it. Did I capture that accurately or did I miss some verbiage? If so, you can drop it in the chat. I'm happy to grab it from there.
Oh, I would be happy to throw it in the chat. There you go.
Would you like to speak to your motion, ma'am?
I think it's probably pretty clear. We've got some issues when it comes to equity. You know, some of our schools have, or our LEAs rather, have no match, and some have a match that's over 30%. And I think this needs to be something that's moved forward for discussion and debate, and to just address it in the interest of all the students in our state, as well as getting the arts into all of our schools. I think that when we talk about student attendance and hooking kids, we often neglect the arts as one of those things that gets them there and keeps them there. And we recently discussed the effects on behavior, some of those things. And so I would love to move that forward and see if we can do great things.
Vice Chair Davis.
I'm waiting to make another motion. I support this
Okay.
one.
All right. Anyone else need to make a comment on this? I'm not seeing any. Committee members, go ahead and vote.
I'm in favor. Still can't find the
Okay.
button.
That passes unanimously. Okay, Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to move the SOEP motion recommendations minus the increase of the 6 courses. And then I'd like to add something. And then I'd like to add that it seems like this topic that's in question is largely the private school topic, and it seems like we need to ask staff to work with the legislature on making it its own entity. If the OLAG audit said to reconsider this hybrid model that they're using, and and also that they need to allow everyone to participate. Well, everyone in Utah can't participate if it's a hybrid model at a school in a classroom. So they need to have a separate line item that's like a private school partnership or something, or all of these motions that or they need to change what they're doing. So in my opinion, which is maybe why they're moving it to a private vendor, because they don't want my opinion, but that's my opinion currently. So I don't know if can we add at the end of these motions to ask staff to work with the program folks and legislators on looking at possibilities outside of the SOEP program.
Would you consider just having that be the motion, that we clear that up first? And then if that does not do it, then come back to this?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. It's,
I don't want to, I just thought, you know, if that's what they're gonna do, then do we need to go through the 15 other, the laundry list of ideas?
yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what the other board members think, if that's, you know, acceptable to them too. It just seems like it would clear up a lot. But also, I don't really necessarily think that that would allow the homeschool students the like 100 kids, whatever we have, not that many, to stay in the SOEP program through the state that has a teacher and a course through the SOEP program. So it could just be the private school that does this hybrid model. And then those few private schools that use it as the actual SOEP model, and the homeschool students could all stay under this USBE umbrella. And then this contractor could work with the private schools under a different named program to do this hybrid thing, which really sounds more like just a contract for curriculum or assessments or whatever they're doing. Thank you.
Board Member Bogus? Did you have a comment on this, or are you waiting for a different motion?
Both, actually.
Okay, then let's
Member
have the
David?
comment on this.
Just as maybe a little back and forth, Chair. Member Davis, I would love to prohibit any private school with an in-person teacher from using the SOEP. And I don't know how we explore that with your motion, but what are your thoughts and where would that go in here?
Well, I think that's what OLAG was asking us to consider, because it seems like the complications between that whole model. So I really don't know. That would come with clarification to the code, because apparently this little piece of code to move this to a private contractor or vendor came like in the 11th hour of the legislative session. So there wasn't really opportunity for us to ask questions or give feedback, or the public to give input. So it really, that whole thing probably needs to be explored. And we probably need a motion that says that staff will explore all of these options, because I have a feeling whoever or whatever made that code change in the 11th hour is probably going to come back this session to add more details, I'm guessing, to the one line that's there. So I think we should be speaking up in those meetings with some say, especially for the homeschool and the private school students that aren't involved in the hybrid model, who want an SOEP pure kind of experience. I mean, maybe someone could help us come up with a motion.
I would love that. And I think most people who pay for private school are pretty disgruntled and disillusioned that their kid is enrolled in an SOEP process and they're unaware of it. I think that's something that is probably causing consternation for all those who have private school students and are listening to this meeting right now.
I think that, do you think that last piece in italics, Chair, forgive the back and forth, just, I know it's
No,
6
go
o'clock and we
ahead.
need to end right now, but do you think, I think that captures, but I would also add a sentence to that motion. You know, with that clarity and or, you know, moving this out of the SOEP space into its own named line item. Or, you know, I don't know, just to add clarity for parents and for providers and for everybody involved. Because the legislature may say, we like this hybrid. ASU's, getting part of the money and the private schools are getting part of the money. We like it like this. But that's also, if I'm understanding right, precluding them from working with Utah Fits All. So they may want to really just do a complete step away from SOEP and kind of figure out their own thing. Seems more like a contract for materials or assessments or whatever they're using. I mean, if the committee's okay with that last bullet, before we get granular, maybe just try to figure out where the legislature is coming from and if they would consider these things as their OLAG audit requests, I think it would be good.
Chair
Fair.
Moss.
Yeah, just clarification. I think there's a lot to be explored here, and I appreciate Vice Chair Davis's attempt to kind of figure out where the legislature is going. What input do we have? Do I understand this to be basically a motion to direct staff to explore those as opposed to a direction that we recommend something specific as a policy change at this point? We've had a lot that was condensed down, and I'm not sure how it ended up. Are we trying to indicate a particular outcome or just continue the exploration so that we're weighing in at that table?
Well, I think this would be a motion to seek either one of these things, whichever is more preferable to the legislature. But it's incongruent currently.
That's where I'm trying to make sure I get the intent.
And, as we start down this trail of conversations, it may need to change as we get closer to session. But I think this is an important place to start. And it seems like the OLAG audit has similar recommendations. At least for reconsidering hybrid and also allowing all students to participate. So they can either reconsider hybrid or they can allow all students participate in a separate thing that's not SOEP, because SOEP is designed for any student in Utah to participate, not only in your program, those that are in your one private school.
I'll just say I support it as framed. It seems to me good exploration without pre-committing us to a particular recommendation to the legislature, if I'm understanding it. Am I getting that right, Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, I think we're recommending one of these two options based on the information that we have, but it may need to change or get more granular as we get closer to the session, depending on how these two conversations go.
Well, okay. I mean, are we, if we forward this motion to the full board, are we recommending that we are going to do one or the other, or that we are going to explore the two so that we can come up with definitive recommendations?
So that we're going to ask staff to work with the legislature on both. One would have to, they both can't happen. One has to be more preferential to the legislature than the other. So you'd have to really explore what they want to see happen and if they would consider one of these two things.
Yeah.
But we have to say, this is what we're recommending. I mean, and then come back and say no, and then we need to maybe look at something else.
The suggestion would be that this discussion happens prior to the session. In other words, this is an
Yes.
exploratory discussion to happen sound out the legislature on the intent of last year's legislation so that we can come back with something perhaps definitive after that discussion. I would assume we don't just send it off and say, well, whichever one of these comes out, then we've already sent it on its course. It brings it back to us after the discussion. Is that the intent?
Well, anything that we recommend, once the bill is drafted and the code languages, we can take a position on whether we support or not, depending how the details come out. Yes.
Well, that's true. Chair, do you mind if sorry, I got diverted into
No, I love that, please. Thank you.
back and forth, but I guess, Vice Chair Davis, one distinction I thought I saw here was the exploration would be prior to the session, and we'd be sort of informed on their intent so that we might clarify our recommendation in, November, December, rather than just sending this off to sale and then seeing a bill that comes out of it. Is that?
I think that would be just fine.
Okay.
We're early enough that would be just fine.
Got it. Okay. That would be helpful, I think, for kind of final review and action. So I'd support this thank you.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is that we request staff to bring back the following options for committee discussion. Work with legislative experts to develop clarification on the relationship between the board and the future contractor to administer this program, and research legislative direction on services delivered in a hybrid environment requiring physical attendance versus the statutory intent for completely online learning experiences as described in code, and/or moving this hybrid approach out of the SOEP program to its own line item for clarity and specific guidance on the implementation.
Chair, can we add the words open to all students, which was another thing OLAG addressed? It was
Yes, where would you
completely
like that?
online learning experience, open to all students as described in code.
Okay. All right, so that now reads, I'm just going to start with the second bullet. Research legislative direction on services delivered in a hybrid environment requiring physical attendance versus the statutory intent for completely online learning experience open to all students as described in code, and/or moving this hybrid approach out of the SOEP model to its own line item for clarity and specific guidance on the implementation. Okay, go ahead and please vote.
I'm a yes, Chair.
Okay, looks like that passes unanimously. And Board Member Bogus.
I just have a final motion, and I did send it to Chief of Staff Young, but I would ask that the committee direct staff to connect with, and I put it in quotation marks, the happiness analysis team to determine their methodology, data, details, etc., and bring the information back to the board with a juxtaposition analysis with the Utah mental health data.
We'll get that up so people can read that.
Do I need to put it someplace else, Chief of Staff Young?
I can grab it off of your text. It'll just take me 1 second.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am.
You bet.
Christina, tell me again, you called that the happiness what?
I put quotes around it, the happiness.
Analysis team. Okay.
Yeah, like, I
Good.
don't know exactly what their name is, and I'm certain that will require a little bit of research. But I'm interested to learn why there's such a disparity and dichotomy between those two. It just seems interesting to me, and I put it in quotations to hopefully give our staff the latitude they need to contact whoever is necessary.
Yeah, I think they should contact all of us and analyze our happiness and fix it. And fix it. Oh, we're so happy. Okay, it looks like we have, does that look like the motion that you wanted?
Yes, assuming this is amenable to the committee, I tried to pull the words that Chief of Staff Young talked about, that they don't understand their methodology, their data, and so it's hard to do that. It's something I really think we need to think about, because we're sending people two very different messages. One is mental health crisis. The other one is happiest people on earth. And those two things are not the same. And I would love to look into it further with the committee's support.
Okay, Chair Moss, was that a hand or not really?
No, sorry.
Okay. All right. Member Davis, is this regard to this motion?
Is this in addition to the other of the mental health screener motions? An additional one, so we're moving all of the ones that staff recommended plus this one?
No, I'm just moving this one.
This one.
Okay.
All right. So the motion before the board is that the committee directs staff to connect with the happiness analysis team, in quotations, to determine the methodology, data details, etc., and bring back to the board with juxtaposition analysis with Utah mental health data. Did you want to speak to that?
I apologize, ma'am. I think I already did.
Oh, no, that's fine. That you were helping us get it on the board. All right. Committee members, go ahead and please vote.
I'm a yes. Chair
Okay,
Moss is a yes.
we are unanimous. And I don't see any other hands. Oh, go ahead.
I'll move the kindergarten, but I also, or should I just move that all of these come to our September or our October meeting to consider for November?
No.
Okay, then I'll move the kindergarten. I know I need to leave. I know we're like over time, but, and I don't think we need to move the trust lands because it's not changing anything. Like if we take no action, they're just going to continue doing the thing they say they're going to continue doing. So we don't need to take a motion on that, right?
Chief of Staff Young?
So you do not. It just I think from our perspective, the board weighing in is an opportunity to then prioritize resources and actions on where it falls. So we would just kind of continue on the existing timeline for the development of the shared LEA needs assessment and prioritizing that and get to school as time and resource allow.
How do you want to proceed, Vice Chair Davis?
Just in the interest of time, if I only have time to do one thing, I'll do the kindergarten so we can kind of help those kids who are moving in at the off ages.
Okay. So the motion before the board is to provide direction to work with legislative leaders on addressing the current age requirement for students that start kindergarten in another state and move to Utah.
Chair, I have a brief question.
Yes.
And I apologize if I missed this, but just looking at the legislative code right now, I don't see a minimum age in Utah. And in other states, I know that you have to be 5 on or before October 1st or things like that. And I know that we don't mandate kindergarten. It's not compulsory in our state. where am I missing what has led to this current situation?
Chief of Staff Young, do you have someone that could answer this? I think I
Thank
just
you.
saw her light go on.
I was going to say our best expert is going to be Christine Elegante. So Christine, the question that's being proposed is just identification of the code that specifically calls out age requirements for kindergarten in the state of Utah.
Yeah, the age Christine Elegante, K-3 literacy specialist, Utah State Board of Education. The requirement is in statute, and in Utah, our rule is they have to be 5 on September 1st or before to be eligible to be enrolled in kindergarten in our state.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Did we already read the motion in? Yes, we did. Okay. Members, go ahead and please vote.
Chair Moss, yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously. All right, I am not seeing any other hands at this point. Chief-
Motion to adjourn?
That would be, let me just check in with Chief of Staff Young. Are we okay?
Yes, thank you so much. I know it was a later evening and we appreciate all of your feedback and direction. We'll be back with additional information and consideration in your future finance committees through the end of the calendar year.
Great, great. Thank you so much. All right, let's go with that motion. Chair. He made the motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Okay, yes, yes,
Oh,
yes.
yes, and thank you, Chief of Staff Young, and everybody for all the work.
Oh, yes, and thank you all for your staying late on a whatever night this is, Wednesday, and walking us through it. Baby steps. Great. We appreciate you so much. Thank you. And meeting's
Thanks, Chair.
adjourned.